Hello, welcome. I think people are entering the Zoom room and I'll start a more formal welcome and introduction. If you don't know by now, my name is Shannon Jackson. I'm Associate Vice Chancellor for the Arts and Design at UC Berkeley, and it's a privilege to welcome you once again to A+D Thursdays. Today is the 7th program in our series. It's a series that many of you know is also cited inside of a public course called Thinking Through the Arts and Design at Berkeley, a course that we created through my office in order to expose students to a range of creative forms across video, performance, literature, design, film, as well as the visual arts more broadly. And this semester, we're allowed to focus on, in the course and in the series, on the wide-ranging field of time-based media art. We're able to do so thanks to a generous donation from the Kramlich Art Foundation, founded by Cal alumna Pam Kramlich and her husband Dick Kramlich. We are perpetually grateful throughout this series and the course for their generosity and for the vision of the Kramlich Art Foundation and its commitment to education, research, and public programming in the field of time-based media art. This course has been open to the public with an incredible array of artists, critics, and curators. We just had William Kentridge on Tuesday. We have more ahead next week with Chrissy Isles, Candy Sprites, Steve McQueen, and Shireen Nishat down the road. Today, I'm thrilled that we're going to get to welcome Barbara London, Rebecca Cleman, and George Fifield. Before I proceed further, however, I want to position this gathering with an acknowledgement of the history of the land on which our campus stands. UC Berkeley is sited on the unceded and ancestral land of the Ohlone people. Hence, when we gather on this campus, whether we do so virtually or offline, we recognize the history of the Ohlone people and also the fact that the Ohlone tribe are part of a flourishing members of our community and of the Bay Area more generally. As UC Berkeley is in the process of repositioning and rethinking its own relationship to this history, protocols of acknowledgement, like I just offered, are part of our institutional culture. As I have said throughout my introductions, we have, in the exploration around time-based media art, become acutely aware of the politics and aesthetics of place, as well as the role of time-based media artists in addressing some of the most fraught political, environmental, and even psychological issues of our time and of our history. Certainly those issues feel more pressing to many of us now as we reckon with how much screen-based interaction is structuring our lives right now. Today, we have the chance to welcome a group of luminaries who have an incredibly deep understanding of the history of the field, as well as those who are well positioned to help us imagine its future. I hope that you've had a chance to look at the biographies of these three that we've shared with you online, so I won't repeat all of them here. I will start off by welcoming first Barbara London, who is one of the most influential and longtime curators of video art there at the beginning, one who participated from the beginning until our current moment in defining and redefining the field. So much so that she now is well positioned to have just published a book on video art called The First 50 Years. Students, fortunately, got their chance to read for our course. Rebecca Clemen now leads an organization that also has been at the center of the long arc of the field and serves as an organization, Electronic Arts Intermix, that serves as an aggregator, as a preservation operation, as a distribution operation for signature works in the field. And it, not coincidentally, is also just celebrating its first 50 years. Meanwhile, George Fifield is the founder of Boston Cyber Arts and has been also at the center of creating platforms that innovate aesthetically and innovate technologically in order to respond to changes that are infrastructural, economic, yes, and technological as the field develops. So these three have generously given me a preview of what they plan to share. And given what we have ahead, I want to organize the event just a little differently than usual. What we're going to do is start with Barbara London, who will share some signature moments. I've asked them all to share some signature moments in their work, in the work from their different institutional positions. And then Rebecca will follow suit with her chronicle from the perspective of EAI. And because Barbara and Rebecca are offering perspectives on a history that overlaps and also might differentiate itself given their different institutional positions, we're going to have them be in a little micro dialogue for a minute or two and potentially take some questions from the audience before Barbara returns to a few more signature works as a way to welcome our third speaker, George Fifield, who's going to be sharing some more current thoughts about technological changes that are affecting both the aesthetics and the economics, as well as the distribution of the field. All right, so with that plan in mind, it's going to be a big day. It's going to be a day of learning. And I'm very excited and thrilled to see and hear what these three have to offer us and what they have to offer each other. As usual, even though you're muted, help me welcome, first of all, Barbara London to the screen. Thank you.
Unmute. Okay. So thank you so much, Shannon, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you, Paris, and the team behind the scenes for making this flow so eloquently and elegantly. And thanks to Pam and Dick Kramlich for their support and their friendship over many years. So I am now going to share my screen. But where did my PowerPoint go? Let me see. Oh, zoot, wait a minute. I somehow, I think, closed my PowerPoint. There it is. Okay, sorry about this. Okay, sorry about that little snafu. Big, go big. Okay, so what I'm going to briefly talk about is how production, exhibition, distribution, and collection go hand in hand. I'm from New York, and I started working at MoMA in around actually 1970. And at that point, I'm just giving you context. New York was bankrupt. And this is just a slide of the inimitable artist, Tony Conrad, on his bike in a very rundown, rough New York. This is an image of an artist in the late 60s holding one of the first portable consumer video cameras. And you can see that the camera is a little weighty. It's 20 pounds, and the take-up reel is another 20 pounds. And the tape was open reel. You threaded it from one reel to the other as you held your camera, hit record, or you had a live image before you even hit the record button. So live, the now, was something very important to artists. And if you think about that moment, it was a time of great foment, the rise of the women's movement, the anti-Vietnam War, demonstrations, and the rise of a lot of Black empowerment. So video took off really as art once the 3/4-inch cassette reached the consumer market in 1971. It meant that an artist could record what they had just generated, and put it in a jiffy bag and send it off to a curator like me or to a Village Voice art writer. Namjoon Paik was one of the first to get a video camera in New York, and his video, Lindsay Cage, which he basically made by recording off the screen a news conference of then Mayor John Lindsay. And Lindsay, in a very signature way, is captured saying, okay, you can start recording. So his gestures are, and his personality are there in this very portrait-like video. MoMA in 1974 held a conference that I think Rebecca is going to talk a little bit about, and that's Open Circuits. Howard Wise, who founded Electronic Arts Intermix, had a gallery in the late 60s on West 57th and was very committed to art and technology and to the rising art form of video. So he was a bit behind in support of the Open Circus, the future of television, organized by WGBH producer Fred Bardzak in Boston, Douglas Davis, artist and writer in New York, and Willard Van Dyke, then the head of the MoMA film department. So you can see the artist Dmitry Devyatkin in the foreground, who's, it appears to be recording. Shigeko Kubota, the wonderful artist, stated at the conference when it was her turn to speak, men think, I think, therefore I am. I, a woman, feel, I bleed, therefore I am. And she went on, recently I've bled 10,000 feet of half-inch tape every month. Video is vengeance and victory of vagina. The conference was organized, then the various talks by the participants were gathered and put into the publication, A Public-Private Art, which I think Rebecca may talk about with publishing. So MoMA's ongoing video exhibition program really began in 1974. The acquisitions program began in 1975 with unlimited edition single channel videotapes. So we can say unlimited single channel was unlimited, and actually these early works cost $250, and we got right away in 75 a number of them that are now considered classics. Lip Sync was one by Bruce Nauman. Naum June's Global Groove, produced 73. Peter Campus's Three Transitions. Joan Jonas's amazing Vertical Roll, which deals with a flaw in the then early television set. The image would perpetually roll. And she played with that as a structural element. Martha Rossler, Semiotics of the Kitchen, a very important video, 75, where she's exploring semiotics and also the role of women in the kitchen. And then very popular TV cookery shows, as Julia Child was on public television, very often giving French recipes. Another artist, very important, Tony Ramos, About Media in 1977. That's something you can research, but just to think about what was being done. Bill Viola, Space Between the Teeth, an important early video that he made, a short one. And at that point, he was assembling a number of works together, almost the way a musician compiles songs on a record album. So Bill made his first trip to Japan to attend a conference organized by Jorge Gloosberg in 76. He returned and really waxed poetic over lunch about what he saw and who he saw in Tokyo. So with a $5,000 grant, I was able to go to Japan in a couple of years later, and then I organized the show video from Tokyo to Fukui and Kyoto, featuring the work of 15 artists. The show had a catalog, opened at MoMA, and traveled to 15 museums. Imagine I did all of that with a $5,000 grant. Mako Itamitsu's work was in the show, Another Day in the Life of a Housewife. So an artist who's really thinking about the role of woman, and very brilliantly, she was undergoing Jungian analysis, but there she's got her own eye observing her as she's at the kitchen sink. Another artist who did video very early and is important for Zagreb, Sonia Ibakovic, also thinking about how women are portrayed in not only the news, but in advertising, making us as women to feel like we had to buy all of these cosmetics. And what is beauty? What is our image? Hardina Pindell, another very important, fairly early video artist. She was also very active with painting and drawings. Free, White, and 21, a very important early work that she made. Shigeko Kubota's Du Championa, New Descending a Staircase was the first video installation to be acquired at MoMA in 1978. And no, it was exhibited in 1978 in the project series. So there's Shigeko, myself in the back, our sculpture conservator and our registrar, just to show you it's teamwork. Every show that goes up, whether it's small, just one object, it's definitely teamwork on the part of the museum or the institution. So that's how conservation is done when a work is acquired, and that's how exhibitions are created. So Shigeko, I was fortunate to know her in Namjoon quite well. And this is the two of us seated before her talk in Video Viewpoints. I wanted very early and got a grant to do this series where artists came, showed their work and talked about it. I always said to them, what you say is as important as what you present. And I was able to record the lecture, transcribe it. That's all in the archives. Japan and I go back from that first visit in around 77. I did another show, and that's when in early 84, I met the amazing Taiji Furuhashi, who was at that point an artist forming the group called Dumb Type. And I always say that I learn a lot from artists, and he was definitely a mentor in my understanding and appreciation of Japan. He was based in Kyoto. So Taiji and I spent a lot of time together. I had 2 sabbaticals in Japan. I was very fortunate. And he created this installation called Lovers in 1994. I put it in the show I organized called Video Spaces. And sadly, when like a week after the show closed, or 2 weeks, Taiji sadly died of AIDS. And the work is very much about love in the time of AIDS. The Canon Corporation donated the installation to MoMA, which went up a year or 2 ago, was brought back. Joan Jonas, another artist I knew and still know, of course. And I actually saw Mirage as a performance at the Anthology Film Archives. And Joan is someone, unlike other performance artists, who does a work, repeats it, refines it, tunes it, fine tunes it, and then says, that's it, I'm moving on. So we were fortunate to MoMA to acquire this work in 2005. So of course, it's not quite the same as seeing the performance, but it's very much, we work closely with Joan. We have the floor plan, how big, how small it can be. We have all of the parts, and we did artist interviews so that we know the aesthetics and what it's really about. So that's it. Now we turn everything over to Rebecca. So I have to stop share. Okay. And then Rebecca, your turn.
Thank you, Barbara. Welcome, Rebecca.
Hello, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm just wanting to get, let's see, yes, share my desktop. I have never shared my screen before, so as hard as that might be to believe. Avert your eyes. Okay, this is the start. All right, here we go. I am so thrilled to be here. Huge thanks to Shannon for inviting me. And I must say it is quite kind of daunting to be in this company, certainly today, and also to speak to the history that I'm going to cover shortly. I have been with EAI since 2000. I started shortly after graduating from college, and it became my school. I never went on to school after that. I was just so enthralled with what I was learning at EAI, and especially from a lot of the artists who are hanging around at EAI, as Barbara mentioned, having learned so much from artists. And I've only recently stepped into the position of executive director. Howard Wise, who I'm going to speak about in a second, founded EAI in 1971, and his successor, Laurie Zapay, ran EAI from the 1980s until 2019, and she's still very much involved. She and I speak frequently, and I owe her a great deal. I learned so much from her. And I'm going to speak a little bit about, Howard was involved with EAI he founded it, and he was involved with it for a period. But Laurie really should be credited with carrying EAI into the future, and also for really advocating for this history. So I'm going to I just wanted to give a little shout out to Laurie and speak to that. So here we are at the Howard Wise Gallery door. Howard's gallery was located on 57th Street, and it operated from 1960 to 1970. Howard had spent his life at the head of an industrial coatings company, Arco Industrial Coatings. And when he retired from that position, he opened a gallery in Cleveland and ultimately decided to relocate to New York. The term visionary gets thrown around too much, but in Howard's case, it was really true. He had obviously moved on to a second career later in life, and he was incredibly hip. He was a huge supporter of the art and technology nexus, and from the beginning was working with some really provocative, challenging, and political artists. And he also was representing a very diverse array of artists for that time. This is a picture of Howard in his gallery with Hans Haacke sculpture. In addition to several Hans Haacke shows, he worked with, as I mentioned, a number of impressive artists. This is just a small sampling: Marta Manouchian, Bruno Munari, Otto Pina, Nam June Paik, of course, Aldo Tambellini, Tom Lloyd, and Tony Martin, among many others. It was an extraordinary history for a gallery that only ran for a decade. This is an image from Tony Martin's interactive game room from 1968, installed in the gallery. Howard's focus was on artists working with technology, but specifically in kinetic and light art, and in particular, artists who are working with interactive and participatory art. Howard's own interest in art had a political bent from the beginning. And he was, very much an avant-gardist, very much believed that art should and could serve a very important social function. And he championed the artists who found a way to do this. In 1969, his gallery hosted TV as a creative medium. It opened in May. I always like to point out that Howard's gallery was just a few blocks down from the CBS studio where the Apollo 11 moon landing was broadcast in July of 1969. So these two things, one event is the apotheosis of television in the 1960s, and Howard's exhibition, TV as a creative medium, the first devoted to television and artists using television creatively, happened within a few months and a few blocks of each other. This is an image of Howard Wise waving. He's being captured in the closed circuit feedback of an installation called Wipe Cycle, which was 9 monitors, which visitors to the gallery would encounter the moment they stepped off the elevator. Ira Schneider and Frank Gillette, who would go on to co-found with other members the Rain Dance, the very important Rain Dance Collective, which was partly an outgrowth of their coming together for TV as a creative medium. And here are some images. You see Wipe Cycle up in the kind of top my left screen. There's a still from Thomas Tadlock's Architron, and then an image of Charlotte Moorman in her collaboration with Nam June Paik, TV for Living Sculpture. There were 11 projects by 12 artists. And even though this was an exhibition and these were artworks, the focus, in fact, was not just on art. And some of the participants were either non-artists, they were engineers or art activists. They were interested in working with video for other reasons. But the undergirding concept of TV as a creative medium was, how can artists use the newly available video and television tools, not only to expand their own artistic expression, but also to do something socially beneficial. And this was actually, out of TV as a creative medium, an important subculture grew, a video subculture. And it was very cohesive for a time through the 70s, and then did disperse as funding fell apart, and some of the structures that kind of maintained that subculture also began to dissipate. But it is part of a much longer trajectory that, I mean, you can probably argue where it begins, but I think one place you could start is looking at Frederick Douglass's writings on daguerreotype photography, which incredibly anticipate a lot of the ideology embedded in guerrilla television and around the video subculture movement. Douglass was looking to daguerreotype photography for its democratizing potential and saw information, open information exchange as essential to changing societal construction. So it's really extraordinary to point to him. This is a letter that Howard Wise sent to his mailing list in 1970, announcing the closing of his gallery after his exhibition. There's a beautiful quote in here about what artists can do with technology. These artists are going out of the gallery, into the environment, the sky, the ocean, even into outer space. Others are seeking imaginative ways of utilizing modern technology to humanize people instead of for commercial and destructive purposes, which dehumanize us all. So this is 1970, the Cold War environment. There is a lot of mysterious activity going on. The military-industrial complex is steamrolling ahead. And even though things are kind of couched in the fanciful space age and, you know, the wonder of the first steps on the lunar surface, there was also something incredibly ominous about this as well. So Howard is speaking to that. For the first few years, EAI actually functioned more as an umbrella organization, supporting and sponsoring a lot of other activities. Howard himself never collected a salary at EAI. He was a major sponsor, a little bit like a Leo Castelli figure, in that he was just a big supporter of artists and their initiatives. Under the umbrella of EAI, the Veselkas founded The Kitchen, also celebrating its 50th anniversary. Howard helped to sponsor a number of computer art festivals, the first women's video art festival, Charlotte Mormon's annual avant-garde festivals. This is a flyer from a little bit later, 1979, but I just think it's fantastic. And I also like to really make clear that even though so much of what Howard was focused on and the video subculture was focused on was television and video, as I said, there is a through line with the very first electronic communications to video, to the internet, to our current moment. So this is an early workshop that offered kind of a hands-on experience with very early personal computers. You saw this book in Barbara's presentation. This is the New Television of Public-Private Art, which was a compendium of the papers that were delivered at the Open Circuits Conference Barbara spoke about in 1974. These are images of some Portapak tapes and the cover of Guerrilla Television, a book that was published in 1971, the same year as EAI's founding, authored by the Rain Dance Collective and Michael Schamberg, as a meta manual to guide users to using the Portapak, but also with a lot of important editorial and ideology built into that it wasn't enough to just use this equipment. One had to think about the whole media ecology you were entering into by using the Portapak. And of course, it was inextricable from television. It wasn't just a video camera with no connection to this communications device. And that was what made it exciting. But then there also had to be recognition that you were tapping into a co-opted situation, you had to use commercial technology, and you had to find your own inroads into this structure that you were infiltrating, essentially. These are some images. Barbara spoke about Martha Rossler's Semiotics of the Kitchen, a very important video art piece. But this collection, I hope, emphasizes that artists were working very directly with television. Either they were working with television as a reference, they were working with it aesthetically, or they were working with it as a system that they wanted to enter into and overturn and challenge, which was certainly what Martha was doing in Semiotics of the Kitchen. Next to her is Ulysses Jenkins' Mass of Images, in which he talks about Black representation on television. And there's a line throughout his tape, you're just a mass of images you've gotten to know from years and years of TV shows. And then we have Joan Jonas's Duet. And I selected that just to demonstrate Joan in the foreground off to the side in a duet with her pre-recorded image. So you see, or through this closed circuit feed, she is able to actually interact with her televised self. Jaime Davidovich was moving on from the early video subculture and EAI's founding in the 70s. Jaime, I think, in part represents a second or third wave of artists who decided actually that they wanted to fully enter themselves into television. Jaime was from Argentina, came to New York in the 60s, actually lived in Ohio for quite some time, then came back to New York. And he, like so many of these artists, is impossible to classify. He worked in painting and sculpture and performance, but he was a avant-gardist to the end. And he had a very well received, and I think pretty, maybe within a certain niche, very popular show called The Live Show, which aired on Channel J, public access in New York City from 1979 to 1984. This show would host a lot of artists, but it also featured Jaime as Dr. Vidovich. Jaime's heroes included Ernie Kovacs, who was a major influence for a number of artists, including Joan Jonas and Nam June Paik, Dara Birnbaum, have all pointed to Ernie as a major figure. He was a television personality from the 50s. So Jaime is actually looking a little more towards Ernie Kovacs and Andy Kaufman as examples for his art making. These are some covers of catalogs from EAI's distribution service. And this is where the transition from Howard to Lori, and then ultimately, to my own experience with EAI comes in. So EAI initially was sponsoring a number of projects. Howard was supporting. He closed his gallery in 1970 and sent out that letter because he wanted to create an alternative paradigm to support artists who are experimenting in this way that he recognized just could not necessarily be, or that couldn't, or shouldn't be contained within a gallery. He recognized that there was a new way of working in this media and that it required a new way of reaching the public. And distribution was key to that. So EAI's distribution program started in 1973. This is actually an amazing, I don't know if it's too small to read, but this is, Howard was also extremely interested in the potential of education. I think Nam June Paik was very influential for him in that. And this is a recommendation to librarians looking at the EAI catalog for particular tapes. There's 4 songs by Bill Viola, and there's some suggestions to those who might want to buy the tape and show it to their class or to their library patrons. This is the first tape that entered into EAI's video collection. It's Ant Farm's Dirty Dishes. That image of the hand holding the tape has no connection to it. I just wanted to show it for demonstrate scale and to emphasize cassette tapes, as Barbara was so good at pointing out. And then I just wanted to very quickly touch on the diversity of the EAI collection. We now represent over 4,000 titles by 200 artists. So it's really an extraordinary outgrowth of EAI's early years. And our distribution includes many names that would be very familiar, including Dara Birnbaum, Tony Cokes, and Corey Archangel, who you see here, but also includes artists who have defied classification through their entire career, and who have made work that hasn't settled comfortably within any particular category, although EAI now represents a canon of its own, representing the unclassifiable. So you see here Dara Birnbaum's MTV Art Break, which was commissioned by MTV, Tony Cokes's number 3 Manifesto A, track number 1 from 2001. And this is actually a still from Corey's The Making of Super Mario Clouds. This installation is, I think, very familiar, but this is a video that he made about the making of that artwork. So there's a meta level there. And these are some more images. This is Merce Cunningham at the top in an early video collaboration with Charles Atlas. He was very excited about working with the moving image, but that wasn't just film. He was very specifically interested in choreographing for video and then ultimately used software to choreograph his dances. This is Kristen Lucas, a still from her video Action from the 1990s, and Peggy Awesh, using an avatar from a video game. It's an example of machinima, which a number of our artists have worked in, called She Puppet. And this is the cover of a CD-ROM project that Dia Art Foundation was really visionary in supporting starting in the mid 1990s. It was completed at the end in I think 1999. But that's very early to be involved in an ambitious CD-ROM, which was a collaboration between Constance de Jong, Tony Orsler, and Stephen Vitiello. Dia hosted an event in December, which you can, and I participated in a conversation with de Jong and Vitiello and Orsler and Karen Kelly, who was at Dia at the time. And you can access that on Dia's site. I highly encourage you to do so. I wanted to mention it, though, as an example of some of the challenges we face distributing media art, because, again, this is a project that was 5 years in the making. And as most of you probably realize, CD-ROMs are, it's unfortunately an obsolete format, and one cannot experience it unless the project is either emulated or completely rebuilt. This is a still that you can access on Dia's site, just to give you a sense of the navigation tools that one once used to have to enter into the CD-ROM. And I also wanted to make a connection between the CD-ROM and the interactivity and Tony Martin's game room. So they're just to demonstrate that this is a lineage, or there's a through line between those projects. This is a still from Jason Scott Musson's Art Thoughts series, which initially and continues to live. It was launched on YouTube, and it continues to live there. And YouTube is an important space for this project. EAI does distribute these works, but they continue to be freely available and perhaps collect comments from new visitors. And I think that its existence within the YouTube frame is very important. And I also think that there's a lot of parity here with Jaime Davidovich. Jason is embodying a persona, Hennessy Youngman, who is often instructing, kind of thinking through and wanting to tell his YouTube audience, which is presumed to be a very kind of general audience. He's hoping to explain some of the trendy theory around art making, aware that this project is itself an artwork, and that part of this too is raising questions of representation, in particular that of being a Black artist, and the sort of tropes or stereotypes surrounding a Black artist in the art world. So this whole series, again, I think is still accessible on YouTube. I hope it is, and I encourage you to visit. And then finally, this is a still from a work by the artist Sandra Perry. It's called IMakeLandArtNow.com. This site does not exist. And this work, I mean, it's something that challenges the concept of what art is, which is also something that was very, very important from the beginning. And I think really inspired Howard Wise, was to embrace artists who didn't settle comfortably in what art could or should be. They were constantly challenging what it might be and how it would reach the public in particular. And here, Sandra, I don't think that Sandra has a Twitter account anymore, but this is a tweet in all caps: I make land art now. Put me in all your white male plus Nancy Holt land art show next spring. So she's issuing a challenge and a provocation here. The piece itself, I mean, the video itself would show, in animation, shows Sandra's tweet kind of moving whimsically through this space that we now kind of, I think, readily associate with land art projects, a kind of monumental land art project. And she's really calling out the art world for how it represents these projects and identifying an absence, and wondering what it would be like if she herself was to be offered the opportunity to make a great land art piece. So I think I'll stop there because I'd like to speak with Barbara, who actually was there at Open Circuits. I can kind of do my best to summarize that history, but Barbara was actually there, and yeah, I'd just like to hear from her. So that's it with my presentation. I guess I'll stop share.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you so much, Barbara. Yes, incredibly rich. And it would be wonderful to hear, you know, Open Circuits originally and how you think about it now. And also, I'll just say what strikes me along the way is this whole notion of the alternative paradigm that you said, Rebecca, everyone is constantly trying to come up with for not only creating new work, but really for creating new systems for supporting the work, whether beyond the gallery, but still using the gallery, beyond the museum, but still using the museum, beyond television, co-opted by television, but still using television. So all of those complicated stories, I think, need to be told and shared more. So off to both of you.
Well, I guess sometimes when I'm speaking, I say about that moment, television was the powerful other, the powerful ugly, that artists could not get on it, into it, could not use the very sophisticated tools. It was public television, through a grant from the Rockefeller Foundation, created these TV labs, and a handful, it's not every artist, a handful of artists were invited in to make work. So that was Peter Campus, that was Bill Viola, that was Adam Schwiller, that was a number of them. So some artists really wanted that, but other artists were very happy, like Martha Rossler, to be working with this consumer camera and making very political work, or addressing these issues of the role of women, the position of women, and these alternatives. And they were utopianists. They really, as Rebecca has said, they really wanted their work out into the hands of other, like they really liked what Howard was doing with the libraries, or with getting collections of the work distributed by EAI at Berkeley, so that in the classes like this one, you know, 40 years ago, then students could really look at it and pay attention to it. So Open Circuits, I was actually very young. I was just early at MoMA, and it was quite an amazing situation where you had brought in from Japan, from Latin America, from Europe, thinkers and the practitioners there. And you had someone like a John Baldessari basically saying to the group, "You're bullshit, you know, this is a new medium, but it's just another pencil. And, you know, you're putting all of this onto it when basically it's about ideas, and get off that position and just make great work." So you had someone like that, and then you had someone like Shigego making the statement that she did, or you had a Shirley Clark also, who was then a venerable filmmaker. She, with John Cassavetes, had founded a collective and was making amazing films, Portrait of Jason. And then she took right away to the video camera and lived in the Chelsea Hotel and had, you know, workshops, because she was a proselytizer, wanting people to really understand what they could do. So it was a very hot room. Full of big egos, some of them big egos, some not, you know, so, and then, you know, not everybody was invited. So there are people who were annoyed, and other people, of course, very happy to be there. And then who was invited. So Jorge Gloosberg was a manufacturer of lighting equipment in Latin America, in Argentina, and he's the one who created these conferences that would be held in different cities. And they were informative and important, because that's how everybody back at that time, not everybody had a travel budget or even a long distance phone call budget. We didn't have the internet or these smartphones that were cheap to make, calls. So, being at these events was very important for sharing of information. So I think that's the takeaway that everybody had. Then you could see what somebody else was doing and, happily would let you know. And that's like the rain dance or, the radical software, and that was sharing the technical. And I think that's what Corey Archangel, using the internet, and where, earlier he was hacking the game devices. So and that's what I think, I love one of your words, Rebecca. I think that's what we often forget is the collaboration. And we forget that there were circles, there were tribes. I always say, I got annoyed at someone once recently speaking at MoMA, where they acted like all of downtown was one group. It was not. Some of them were enemies. They couldn't stand each other, or they were annoyed that so-and-so got New York State Council money and another one didn't, so there were egos, but yet they shared, they did collaborate. Joan Jonas, shared her equipment with, different people. And I think the East Village scene, they were doing it also in a different way. And I think I've always been very interested in this interdisciplinarity and how, like Namjoon and Bill Viola had a foot in music and a foot in the visuals. So, this hybridity is really, really important, because yes, indeed, it's very hard to categorize, and that's what makes it so exciting for the maker, but for us as curators, or Rebecca at EAI. So yeah, so maybe I've just gone off on a tangent.
No, that's perfect, actually, because I think what I kind of skimmed over, Barbara, was how we went from this exciting moment that launched EAI and that really brought together this video subculture. It wasn't, it's hard, of course, it's hard to categorize. It was part of the counterculture, but then there were artists who, were much more focused on art, just art making, and then there were others who were not so interested in art making. But how that fell apart is another story, or sort of how that shifted. And Jaime was somebody who always, I got to be pretty good friends with him, and he would often talk about his life and what sort of was a pivotal moment for him. You notice the live show ran until 1984. And he said that was when everything ended. Reagan was reelected and a lot of arts funding was cut. And he said that things really shifted, and he was very disappointed. I think he talked about how everybody started making installations. Artists had to think of other ways to survive. So they started to think about the art market in ways they might not have before. It was just a very different environment. And for an artist like Jaime, I think that was the final, in a way you could see Open Circuits as already recognizing that this idea, like cable access, was going to be the great promised land, but obviously it wasn't. And I think people kind of knew that by the time Open Circuits happened, that this work was going to have to be supported elsewhere, and that arts institutions were going to be crucial to that support, and MoMA was leading the way there. So that already kind of shifted. Even though they were talking about television, there was already a big shift to its institutionalization and recognition as an art form. But then along comes Jaime and a second kind of wave of cable access in New York City, and that really shifted in the 80s. But then you can't really ever say that the door is totally closed, because as you just pointed out, then later there's Corey Archangel, there's the Collective Radical Software Group, which is knowingly taking Radical Software's name. And then on to someone like Sandra, who is making work that is exploiting every possible channel for accessing the public. In fact, I think for a few more days, Sandra's piece, Flesh Wall, is in Times Square as the Midnight Moment. So just to give you a sense of the scale that she's working at, she wants to reach the public in this completely uncontained way. So I'm glad that
yeah. And I think we're going to see, you know, COVID, I'm not very happy that we still have lockdown and we do have the vaccine, and I wish more would open up and that we'd, you know, take it by the bull by the horns and just open up. But I think, you know, I think artists don't stop. And I think, you know, as long as they're not thrown off the internet or, you know, they find like Sandra, you know, there in Times Square or, you know, using. So yeah, anyway. So maybe I should show the last couple of slides and then let George take it away, and then
that
we
sounds
come back.
great. That sounds
Okay.
great.
Okay. So let me share screen again. Where are you? Share screen button. Share screen. Okay. Whoop, come on. Hope it goes right back to where I was. Let's see. Oh, yeah. That's me. Open. Sorry, there we are. I'm going to have to zoom down. It closed up. Okay, there I am at the dark. There we are. Okay, so let me just now open up so it's bigger. Come on, open. Why did it go away? There, okay, took a minute. So I'll just then, because we're thinking about the art and the installation and what Pam and Dick Cromlech have done in assembling this amazing collection and the support they give. So I just want to mention Nalini Milani, an artist whose work I saw at the Istanbul Biennial around 2003. And I was really taken by it. And then I started to talk with Nalini about this work, game pieces, what it was, talking with my colleagues at MoMA about it as an acquisition. But before I did much, I talked with conservation and my wonderful colleague, Linda Zeicherman in sculpture. And I said, if I propose this, I want to know about materials. What Lexan should I tell Nalini to use? And what about the paint? So actually, when we acquired this piece, we got paint samples. Nalini made the work in what Linda recommended. It was shipped flat. These are cylinders. So we really thought a lot about the preservation of it, even before it entered the collection. Ephemera has always been very important to me in my practice, and I save every paper artists give me. And as I've said, I've been very interested in the interconnect between art and music. So then I did 3 shows called Looking at Music, all from the collection. So I was able to put in these music videos that I had put in a show before, and the ephemera that was in the library. So that's one show. That's my book, which you already know about. I did a podcast series once COVID hit and my book tour was cut because I couldn't travel. I thought, well, what am I going to do? So I did a podcast series and I spoke with 12 artists who, of course, were in their studios and were very happy to talk to me. I was very delighted. And that's online. You can find it at barbaralondon.net. The transcripts are also there. And so in my conversations, I spoke with Rachel Rosen, who works with VR. This is in the collection of the Bladowitz in London. Amazing artists in Los Angeles from Africa, Zina Sarawiwa, Table Manners. I hope you get to see this video and her work. She's from Nigeria, from the South, from Oguniland. And it was the amazing Xiao Fei who did this piece. It took her several years to pull it off. The Eternal Way, it's a VR piece produced with acute art. Then, and I will do a second season of Barbara London Calling, and I won't say what I'm going to do, but stay tuned, I will do it. And I just wrote a big text on Jakob Stinson, an artist who works with VR. And this work, I also am very close to the Cadiz Foundation. This work of Jakob's went into the Cadiz collection, I'm happy to say. And Jakob has a very big show opening in Berlin in April. And I hope you can read about it. It's too short of a moment for me to go into it much, except his new work will be extraordinary. And he's worked very hard with a whole big team of people. So when these artists get a major commission, like Jakob got to do this piece for the site in Berlin, it means he's able to pull out all the stops, and he's worked with the Museum of Natural History in Berlin. So that's it. I'll end my share.
Thank you so much, Barbara. That was incredible. And as we, thinking about Stinson and Chao Fei's VR experiments is a great transition for what George has to share with us. I want to just note as we start to queue up George that I really appreciate, Rebecca, that you took that moment to talk about those moments in 1984 when everything changed, or the great hope for cable television and cable access being a kind of democratization or an alternative distribution or paradigm for the field. And it's just really interesting to think about where things worked and where things clicked and where they didn't. And then, of course, then the necessity for somebody like Barbara London to be finding a way to support the work through an art world. If it wasn't going to work here, it needed to work here in terms of, figuring out how to collect work like this. So as we think now about how technology's changed and the interdependent relationship between video artists and corporations and new technologies in television, we now can also start to think about that interdependent relationship with new technologies in AR and VR. And with that thought in mind, I'm going to send the screen over to you, George, for stories you have to share.
Thank you, Shannon. Am I there? Thank you, Shannon. Thank you very much for organizing this great meeting. And I want to thank your crew too, especially Paris, who got me online, and the Cranliches, who I got to know briefly. Also Megan Ryan, who's their curator, who introduced me to Shannon, and I'm really enjoying this. I started as a video art curator, so this is all music to my ears, but I don't do that anymore, really. Let me get there. What I do now is more digital based work, and of all sorts, but in the last couple years, I've probably organized a dozen exhibitions of augmented reality art. And I'm very fond of it as an idea, as an art form, as a medium, and as a place where very, very interesting people have come to explore. The first augmented reality art I saw was in 2000 at the Los Angeles SIGGRAPH conference. It was only being shown by engineers, and I brought one of those engineers to the Boston Cyber Arts Festival in 2001. So I sort of go back with it for a while, but I date the beginning of augmented reality art to October 9th, 2010, when a collective of artists known as Manifest AR, led by Sander Veenhoff and Mark Skerach, held an exhibition, We Are in MoMA. And what they did was they, without telling anybody at MoMA, placed 40 artists' work scattered throughout the museum. You can see it floating around here. And all of a sudden, a crowd of people were wandering through MoMA, looking not at the artwork on the wall, but looking in their phones at artwork that wasn't really there. This was a concern, certainly to the museum guards, and they notified the curatorial staff. But when the curators found out what was happening, they asked that the AR work stay, which shows the ability of MoMA curators to pivot on a dime. It went on this way for a number of times. This is another unknown intervention at the 2011 Venice Biennale with, you can see some of the work here by Lilian Hongli in the square, and also Tomiko Thiel, who actually led this intervention, a piece of hers at Venice Biennale. The purpose of my talk, though, is to talk about one casualty, everybody's worst nightmare, which is when you're working on a medium, a technological medium, and it goes away. And the most popular program among augmented artists at the time was one called LAYAR. Here's Manifest at Boston Cyber Arts Festival 2011, which we did tell the Institute of Contemporary Art that they were coming to. LAYAR was a very useful program in that it cited work by GPS. And what that meant at the time was that you could look at a work, you could go away, you could come back and find it in the same place, roughly the same place. The technology they use today for that is much more robust. And a while back, LAYAR, L-A-Y-A-R, got bought by a company called Blippar, B-L-I-P-P-A-R. They love these AR jokes. And what happened in that was Blippar basically tore through $150 million of venture capital money and almost went broke. And to resolve their problem, having stripped LAYAR of all the patents they wanted, they got rid of LAYAR. All of a sudden, thousands of works of art disappeared. And I want to start by showing you a couple of them. This is one of my favorites. This is Big R by Sander Veenhoff, one of the founders of We Are in MoMA. And it is the largest artwork sadly, the largest artwork in the world. It was composed of 7,463,185,678 cubes like this that completely surrounded the earth. You could see it from any place you looked. You could look up with if you went to your LAYAR and put in Big R, it would pop up. And it was interactive in that you could just, with a single press of the button on your iPhone, change, or Android, change the color of all the cubes at once. And this, in fact, this shot was after I had changed it to lime green, and I took this picture in my backyard. And it was just an amazing piece that it was as physically interesting to look at as it was psychologically interesting to think about that it even existed. Two other artists that I really want to point out. This is Privateer's Reenactment by Will Pappenheimer. Will and Tomiko, both of whom were members of Manifest AR very early, were in a show that I put together at the Salem Maritime National Historic Site called The Augmented Landscape. And they all the artists, all four artists, brilliantly sort of picked up on the theme of the park. This was the America's first major port, beating out Boston and New York. And so Will did this floating ball of ship's masts that made this wonderful creaking noise like rope on wood, as you would find on a ship. And he also did this piece, which is called The Ascension of Cod. And it was a giant school of cod, being the source of protein for early people coming to the Americas. And as you see, they're all swimming up to a golden light in the sky. Where their origin, the little building at the bottom that you see with the cupola, is the Salem Custom House. And so a very important place in American history. Again, a wonderful piece of art, completely gone. Tomiko, who organized that intervention at Venice Biennale, did two pieces. There, did two pieces for the augmented landscape. This is the Treasures of Shae Ram, where she tried to analyze what it was that the traffic, the shipping from Salem to the Far East, what it was that the Asian ports wanted from America. And of course, you can see poppies here, and other things that she had, ginseng and things like that. The giant faces in the sky are actual drawings done by Japanese artists of the very first Western sailors that they ever saw. And then she did this piece here, The Gardens of the Anthropocene. And what this is, a giant blow up of enlargement of the Dinoflageates algae bloom. And that's the algae bloom that causes the red tide, which makes the fish caught in it and the shellfish particularly poisonous. And these things, each of these algae was about 6 feet tall when you walked up to it. So there were two responses to Layar's demise. As I said, thousands and thousands of artworks were just lost by artists. Tomiko lost all of hers, and Will lost all of his. They're still making work. Tomiko, working with her husband, Peter Graff, decided that what they were going to do is create a new version of Layar, a open source Layar that would also have GPS. They call it AR Poise, for Augmented Reality Point of Interest Service Environment. It's one of the important things is that Layar was available for both Apple and Android devices. And they have made theirs available for both Apple and Android devices. This is very important because the other solution to this is the companies, Google and Apple, are both buying up everything they can buy up in the way of augmented reality companies and putting them, the ones they buy up and own, putting that equipment, that ideas into only their AR work. Both companies are rapidly pursuing AR. And so open source is really one of the few ways we'll be able to see it everywhere. And I hope that this is something which continues. Apple, for instance, recently bought up Meteo, which is one of the interesting augmented reality apps. And now Google and Android phones can't use the equipment that was Meteo had developed. So here's the question. Oh, and I wanted to finish by showing Tomiko's unexpected growth, which she did with AR Poise. This was done for the Whitney Museum exhibition, programmed, curated by Christian Paul. And You can see it's a beautiful garden looking out at the roof deck of the Whitney, and all of these strange growths, including forks and spoons, as part of the vegetation. There are other open source technology. A good example is processing, built in 2001 initially by Casey Reese and Ben Fry, and the operating system Linux by Linus Torvalds, both of which are very important, that everybody can use them, everyone can help build them, everyone can come up with ideas for them, and yet they're not corporations. And so that's really what I wanted to say about this. Next time you see an augmented reality work, it's worth noting what it was made on and how people got to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, George, for the cautionary tale. And for showing us incredible work that we don't actually get to experience right now. And I wonder, as questions start to queue up, Rebecca and Barbara, if you have some thoughts or questions for George, just in light of the histories that you know and have been a part of, about, again, the fragility of artwork that is dependent upon and also intervening in these technologies that might be publicly accessible over cable, but also proprietary, subject to corporate takeover, or subject to what happened to Layer in terms of the erosion of all its patents, et cetera. Just a thought or question for George.
Well, I'm probably, Rebecca will chime in. I agree. It's quite deplorable, and I would, open source, but we have greedy corporations. What can I say? All they think about is money, the money that they're going to make selling these programs. So I have to hand it to you for organizing these shows, and to Tamiko and her partner for creating an open source. I just hope there's more of it. And I hope, given what we've gone through in this last year, there's even more of it, because very creative people are at home, very smart people. So what can I say? I'm as annoyed as you.
Yeah, I think that what I meant to say, and I didn't say it, but you demonstrated it, George, is really true, that artists really do lead the way. I mean, they just are able to, I think of Marshall McLuhan's talking about them as being important probes. Like, they are just able to do something, to let you see your world and your society in a new way. And they're not the only ones that do that. I think sometimes artists are put on this pedestal, and unfortunately that kind of leaves out a lot of other really important members of our culture. But what is happening in the cycle too is that because artists are visionaries and they are able to create new aesthetics and break new ground, corporations first, I think, support them in that. And then all too often kind of co-opt what they discover and integrate it. And that's just like an old story that I think was something that was very much a part of this whole television hope and ambition too, was like this idea that first, the TV as a creative medium exhibition was full of televisions that had been disassembled, augmented, taken apart. And yet there's this feeling of the art being ingested and kind of consumed by the corporate technology that was used to build it. And I think that's what you're speaking to, George.
Another story that I know, because I went to the 1998 conference that BAVAC held in San Francisco on the preservation of video. And they had a whole bunch of Ampex engineers there, Ampex were the people who invented videotape. And at one point, they were talking about the fragility of videotape. It was described by one person as rust on plastic. And one of the things they were asked by the audience was, why didn't you make an archival videotape? Or could you have made an archival videotape? And the answer of the engineers was, yeah, it would have been very easy. Why didn't you? There was no market for it. So sometimes it's not just that a corporation destroys something they have, but they don't even go down the path they could.
Well, it's so complicated. It's not simple. It's very complicated, you know, and also they could say, yeah, we decided not to go down that path, but they probably knew, yeah, a MoMA or a Whitney or, you know, the museums or the artists or Howard Wise would have wanted that, but that's a very small market. But yet that's what we're all fighting for. We fight to preserve, but we know that technology is a moving target. We know it's always going to advance. And then some artists in the 70s and the 80s, you know, when then computers were becoming more affordable, it was like, well, they're making these new systems just so that we have to buy more equipment. Well, but you appreciate the bells and whistles that new equipment has, you know, so it's like, you know, it's a push-pull. And we all work really hard to think about the longevity. And yeah, I don't know what to say.
That's why I really have to applaud what MoMA does in collecting this and preserving this work, because it's very important.
Well, but I think this is also, we have to applaud the Kramliks and for them to create an entity where SF MoMA, and the Tate have worked very hard. And I know Rebecca, EAI has been in these conversations as well. You know, we share information. I know that I at MoMA and the Kitchen and maybe EAI, we've collaborated together to work together on the preserving of certain works. Why should everybody do the same job? So, yeah. And then when I used to go to archive meetings, and you know, you have to make decisions about what you're going to archive, what you're going to preserve first. So that's an unfortunate question, you know, something that has to be dealt with. But anyway.
Maybe as we are puzzling through these things that are such difficult and, you know, thorny, but perpetually interesting questions, we could start to get more questions coming from the audience. I would love it actually if a couple of people would be willing to be unmuted to ask your question. Eric Cortez, is that possible for you? I hope so. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you. So I had a question. I guess it could apply to all three of you, but specifically it came up when George mentioned the way that VR pieces caught the security's attention in 2010. I'm curious to know, like, if and when this art was contested or prohibited, what the creators would do. Or perhaps a better way to phrase my question is if this art was ever prohibited or if it faced attempts to be limited, and if so, how was this done? I was just curious because I think any other art piece can simply be taken down or removed from the gallery. But with VR, I know it'd be a little different. I'd be curious to see what this looks like.
First of all, I just terminology here. What I've been talking about is augmented reality, AR. VR is a different creature entirely. And I'm a big AR fan and a medium VR fan. But that's the wonderful thing about augmented reality is that it can be so guerrilla-like that you really, most people don't know it's there. It's invisible until you go and look for it. And somebody has told you, oh, go to this place and look at this, and there it is. So in fact, it, as opposed to most other art, it's safe from that kind of censorship. And of course, the fact that they had it at the Venice Biennale, the fact that they had it at MoMA, and neither of those organizations knew what was going on, and that you can now make monuments to your heroes, and no one else will know they're there.
Well, you can do that, but then how do you let people know they're there? You know, your little circle of friends, or because there was an AR piece that some big anime company did, and you know, then all of a sudden, all around Brooklyn, all these young kids are running around with their phones. So yeah, so I think that's like in the early days of video. How do you let people know that this work is on view in this storefront, that's an alternative space, that's, you know, so, do you hope you, back then it would be get a little note in the Voice, get a note in the Times. Now we have the internet. Now we, put out, we have MailChimp, and we send out, so.
In our last few minutes, I'm going to ask Edgar and Casey, who are our teaching assistants, grad student instructors, to show their video. We'll create a slight more conviviality as we go further into Q&A. Such great questions going, and a couple. One from Jeff Martin, who knows a great deal actually about these questions when it comes to preservation and different questions about technology, obsolete and less obsolete. Jeff, do you want to throw something out to us? Thanks for unmuting yourself.
Oh, sure. It's really for Barbara and Rebecca, and talking about, also for George, I guess, talking about technologies that become obsolete for corporate reasons. I'm thinking specifically about display equipment for the early works, for the CRTs, and when so many of the early works had to do with the properties of the CRT, Zen for television, TV magnet, vertical roll, how you think about recontextualizing or getting ready for the time when those CRTs just aren't going to be around. We're working, I'm a conservator, we're working as hard as we can to keep them alive for you, but that time will come. And it's a question I think about a lot.
Good for everyone to think, all three of you, I'm sure, have something.
Like I say, I'm no longer at MoMA, but I work very hard with the conservators and my colleagues to, I think at one point, before I stepped down, I think we had bought, 50 4:3 aspect ratio monitors just for that very reason, that, we wanted them to be on hand. And then this collection of single channel videotapes and the installations now there, which is wonderful, that Glenn Lowry, and there's much more dialogue that goes on among the curatorial departments, but you'll find video in many different, these single channel videos on monitors, 4:3, the aspect ratio. It's a big conundrum. When we acquired the very beautiful work from 1990 of Gary Hill, in as much as it is always already taking place, which is, I think, 16 or 17, rasters, the TV tubes taken out of the casing. Well, we bought two backup sets, knowing that a TV tube has a life. And, if you buy a secondhand monitor, it already had a life. So how do you, so these are all very big issues. So then you talk with Gary Hill with that piece, because he's still alive, what happens when we have no more monitors, and does the piece die? Joan Jonas's vertical roll really isn't meant for a flat screen, especially what their aspect ratio 16:9, and it's a very intimate work. A lot of these early works that Rebecca has there with EAI and distribution, there's an intimacy when it's the TV set and the head size of a Bruce Nauman or a Joan. It doesn't really work as well in a theater when it's projected, And does Joan want it that way? Maybe not. You know, Bill Viola used to have very strict requirements for how his single channel work was shown. And of course, he has very strict requirements for how his installations are shown. And then I know Steve McQueen got very upset when MoMA has at least one work of his. He did not like the projector because it was not an analog, not a 3-tube, you know, and it has different luminance. So these are all very important things to work out with the artists when they're alive.
Yeah, I think that's the key is we always, at EAI, we always defer to the artist. Obviously, you don't always have that luxury, but that's the preference. And I would just say that artists have very different feelings. Vito Acconci felt very strongly that he didn't want the technology to be fetishized. So he did not want his work to always have to be shown on older equipment. Even if it made more sense, like a piece like Centers makes more sense in some ways on a CRT monitor, but he didn't want that shown on a CRT monitor, where you have other artists who feel very differently. And some are happy to see their work die, actually, if it can't be supported in its original intent. And then you see, you know, what George was talking about, or the CD-ROM project I mentioned, Fantastic Prayers, was a 5+ year undertaking. And unless it's rebuilt, and it will have to be rebuilt in a completely new form. It won't be a CD-ROM. It will be probably something people deal with on their phones. It will be a different piece. But I think you can ask the same questions about Felix Gonzalez-Torres's work or Dan Flavin. And I guess a general feeling that I have is that we really look towards the museums. We see the museums taking much more care. And really, as Barbara has been saying, we see them as partners. Obviously, no one can do this alone. And the museums have these incredibly detailed time-based media questionnaires that I know are in the interest of stewardship. And I think increasingly we will look to the museums to do everything they can. And if that means totally reconstructing and emulating, like I think this has been done with some ant farm pieces, a beautiful recreation of a living room environment to see one of their works, then that's one thing. But if the museum needs to communicate how Vito Acconci feels about his work and support him in that, then they'll do that. But I don't think it's ever going, there's no answer. I just think it's an ongoing effort.
It's very difficult for institutions. One that I always think about very fondly is the Walker Art Museum, who have literally built a entire place in their museum, probably in the basement somewhere, that is housing 1980s computer equipment. And they keep it running so that they can show very early web art, like AutoWeb and things like that. But because you can't run it on today's computers or today's servers. So to keep it up and happening, you can still go on the web and see AutoWeb. And you can still go on the web and see other early web pieces because the Walker keeps this going for them.
That's amazing.
Amazing, yeah. So it's about preserving the artwork and then preserving the technology that supported the artwork as itself an art piece to some degree. Casey and Edgar, since we're starting to run out of time, I wonder if each of you could pose a question. We'll have you each pose one, and we'll see what the responses are from our three panelists to one or both, if you don't mind, and we'll have them in the air. Yeah.
Yeah, I can ask the first question from someone asking about crypto art or kind of the new emerging NFT or non-fungible tokens, if there's any thoughts about that new field.
And the other question I'll just throw out, if you want to answer it, is about, it's specifically about AR, but I think it could apply to the early video art as well. But it's about the role of this sort of art in political demonstration and intervention.
Goodness.
I can handle some of Casey's question in that when the protests took place in New York in Zuccotti Park, that the only people, and they were not allowed to, they were protesting Wall Street, and they were not allowed to go to Wall Street. But John Craig Freeman and some others filled Wall Street with augmented reality protests, including, my favorite was the little money man from Monopoly, was all throughout and around Wall Street. So there are ways to protest, and everybody, the way you find out about it is social media.
Mm-hmm. The crypto art question is, it's complicated, and I can't profess to know a lot about it, but what I will say, actually, a curator at the Albright Knox Museum, Tina Rivers Ryan, was recently posting very eloquently about this, and saying that there are some benefits to being able to commodify that kind of art through blockchain security, but that it also really betrays the accessibility and the whole essence of unlimited, certainly an unlimited video, but this idea of media being uncontainable. So by employing this kind of way of locking down and identifying a quote unquote authentic or singular object in the digital realm, it just completely, it's an artificial scarcity, which is just always something that, I want artists to see the benefit of their art making, but it's always going to be contrary to the roots of certainly of unlimited video and what EAI was founded to support.
But yet, the commodification, as we were saying, in 1984-ish or in the 80s, as a lot of the work went from unlimited edition to editions. So that's when projectors got better. So I would always ask an artist, why are you slapping an image on a wall? What's the reason? What's your motive? Why is it, blah, blah. So I wanted to hear those reasons. So then here we are now with blockchain. And so it's another territory. So, and we've got, I forget if it's Sotheby's or Christie's, one of them is doing auctions now of this work. So, so I think there's always edition and unlimited edition. And I think the nature of the digital work that most of us here, I think, have been so committed to is work that represents the artist's voice. And it's not about the preciousness of it. It's about the statement and the pleasure or the stimulation that we get from it. So, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. A great way to end in terms of sounding once again a theme that we are going to continue to hear about that the tension between the scarcity model versus the accessible, democratized model, and it does seem like it will be a perpetual tension. I said at the beginning that this session, today's event, was going to be all about learning, and it was. This was such an incredible group. The three of you really delved into all of these places where the rubber really hits the road when it comes to the care and feeding of this form. You are great at caring and great at feeding us all today. Thank you so much for joining us. Everybody in our crew tuning in, if you don't mind, help me thank Barbara, Rebecca, and George for being such luminaries today. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, all of you.